Christ offered up himself voluntarily. Hebrews 7:27. It's talking about the high priest and Christ being our high priest. And he said, for such an high priest became us, this is talking about Christ, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, and made higher than the heavens, who needeth not daily, as those high priests, to offer up sacrifice, first for his own sins, and then for the people's. For this he did once, when he offered up himself. Right, Christ offered up himself. When he was with his disciples, before he was crucified, he said, let's go up to Jerusalem. And it says he set his face steadfastly to go up to Jerusalem, knowing that he was going to be sacrificed there. And then it says back in Genesis, where we're looking at Abraham, he said, offer him therefore a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will tell thee of. A burnt offering. Now, what was it that distinguished the burnt offering? We've looked at this before. The burnt offering was to be a sweet savour to God. Well, what about Christ and the burnt offering? Well, let's look at Ephesians 5:2. Ephesians 5:2. Verse 1, be ye therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ also hath loved us, and hath given himself for us an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savour. And so we see Isaac was to be a burnt offering, and Christ was our burnt offering. And then it says, offer him therefore a burnt offering there, upon one of the mountains that I will tell thee of. Right? Christ was crucified there at Jerusalem, but outside the city on Calvary, on one of the mountains of Moriah. And he was offered there so he could be our substitutionary sin offering. So, in the story in Genesis, Abraham takes Isaac to sacrifice him. Now, note verse 5. Verse 5, and Abraham said unto his young man, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again to you. Now, this is very interesting here. He says to these two men that were with him, servants, he said, Isaac and I are going to go to where we're got to go. Right? And we will come again. Right? He says, abide ye here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. So, Abraham believes he will sacrifice Isaac. He obviously has every intention of. But he believes that God will resurrect him, and both he and Isaac will return. And you say, well, that I'm stretching it there. It doesn't say that. Well, progressive revelation is a wonderful thing, because if we go over to Hebrews 11, Hebrews 11, right, and verse 17, it says, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, and he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, It's interesting that he's called his only begotten Son there, the same as Christ, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called. Now listen to this. Accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. In other words, Isaac was going to be sacrificed, but Abraham believed that God would raise him from the dead because God had promised this son. And so he was a promised son. He was to be sacrificed, and Isaac believed that he would be resurrected by God. Now, it didn't happen that way because Isaac believed that his faith was counted for righteousness and he was accepted of God. But he believed that that's what would happen. And that's exactly what happened with Christ, isn't it? Christ was sacrificed and God raised him from the dead, and he was with his Father once more. Then note verse 8. We go back to Genesis 22 and verse 8. And Abraham said, no, here we are. Verse 7, and Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? And Abraham said, now notice what he said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. God will provide himself a lamb. Now, it could have said, just as easily, God himself will provide a lamb. But it doesn't say that, does it? It says God will provide himself a lamb. So the lamb would be provided by God, but as well, the lamb would be God. And this is actually a prophecy that Christ, as the Lamb of God, would die for us. And then note verse 13. God had said in verse 12, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him, for now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. Now this becomes an interesting thing. The ram here becomes a type of Christ. It becomes a substitutionary sacrifice for Isaac. It says offer him up in the stead of, right? Instead of. When we looked at substitution, that's what it's talking about. So this ram became a substitute. And it says about this ram, and behold, behind him a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And we say, oh, well, that was convenient, but God provided that. And is that significant? He's caught by his horns. Yes, well, it is significant. What was required in a sacrifice? It was to be without spot or blemish. How could a ram that was caught in a thicket be without spot and blemish? Well, the only way is for him to be caught by his horns. And we see the attention to detail that God gives us within the scriptures when we look at this. God had said that for a sacrifice to be acceptable to him, it had to be without spot and blemish. And now God provides a sacrifice, and he sees to it that it is without spot and blemish, caught by his horns. And so we see Isaac as a wonderful type of Christ. There is more that we could have looked at, but at least that gives you an idea of how to look at these types and how to trace them through. And I think we'll leave it at that there.